Shalom, everyone. I'm Josiah Geoffrey.
I'm Hosea Geoffrey.
And we're back discussing the Torah portions. This week we're looking at the portion of Chuqat, which goes from Numbers 19:1 through 22:1. On some years, this portion is read along with the next portion, Balak. So be sure to check the pinned comment below to see if you should read both portions or just this one this week. We've already read the portion ahead of time, so if you'd like to read it as well, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then we'll get into discussing.
In Chuqat, the people of Israel enter the final year of their wandering, in which Moses and Aaron are barred from entering the Promised Land, and Aaron dies in the wilderness. After which, Israel begins to conquer the territory of the Amorites on their way to the land of Canaan.
So this portion begins with God telling Moses how to cleanse the Israelites when they've been around dead bodies. God says that the people of Israel are supposed to bring a red heifer, a heifer without defect and has never been used for plowing or anything like that. It's never had a yoke on it. And they're supposed to take it and give it to the priest. And then the priest takes it outside the camp and he kills it there. So unlike offerings that are made at the Mishkan, where it's then put on the altar and such, in this case, it's taken outside the camp and killed there. And then he's supposed to take its blood and sprinkle it toward the tent of meeting, but he's not actually at the tent of meeting. At this point, the priest is then supposed to take the heifer and burn it to ashes. He puts in some cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet material in with the heifer as it's burning, and then he leaves it to burn completely down to ashes. And the reason why he's supposed to do this is that afterwards they can then collect the ashes and keep those around. And then when someone has been around a person who's died, you then cleanse them by taking some of the red heifer ashes, mixing them with water, and then sprinkling that mixture on the person who needs to be cleansed.
So the purpose of the ashes of the heifer is to purify people who are unclean because they've been around dead bodies. But it also says that it is a sin offering. Now, as we've seen before in previous portions, sin offerings can also purify physical uncleannesses, even if they're not exactly a sin. And so that's kind of the function of what the red heifer does for the people of Israel. But in its capacity as a sin offering which purifies the people of Israel, the red heifer serves a pretty unique role. And the author of Hebrews actually uses that role to point to Yeshua. Hebrews says, "For if sprinkling the ashes of a heifer upon those who are defiled sets them apart to the purifying of the flesh, how much more then will the blood of the Messiah, who through the age-enduring Ruach offered himself unblemished to God, purify our conscience from dead actions to serve the living God? Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having the hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience, and having the body bathed with pure water." So what the author of Hebrews is saying is that the red heifer, as an unblemished sin offering, was able to purify the flesh of people who had been around dead bodies. But like other sin offerings of the Torah, the red heifer purifies the body, and it has to do with our physical uncleannesses. But Yeshua's sacrifice is even better because it's able to purify our conscience. As the red heifer purifies those who've been around dead bodies, Yeshua purifies our conscience from its dead actions. Apart from Yeshua, our dead actions, our sins, keep us from following God the way we should. It makes us unclean, like we've talked about in previous portions. Our sin taints our righteousness. It taints us. It tarnishes our conscience. But Yeshua is able to purify our conscience. He's able to make us clean despite our sins, so that we can serve the living God. Once our consciences are pure, we're able to serve God the way we ought to serve him, with a true and pure heart in full assurance of our faith.
So after God gives all the instructions here for the red heifer, the portion then moves on and goes back into narrative. Based on some things we read in other passages in Torah, it seems like here we're getting to basically the end of the wandering in the wilderness. Probably we're at the last of the 40 years in the wilderness now. As a side note, it mentions that Moses' sister Miriam has died and she gets buried, but then it moves on to talking about how the people of Israel are again complaining to God, getting some deja vu here. They're again complaining to God because they want water. Basically, again, the people say, "Why'd you bring us out here in the wilderness? We wish we had perished along with other people who had died." So probably referencing something like Korah or something like that. "Why'd you make us leave Egypt? We're thirsty and we don't even have any fruit or anything to eat." And so again, Moses and Aaron go to God and they fall on their faces and they're like, "What do we do?" So as a quick flashback here, we read back in Exodus that twice the people of Israel complained for water. The first time there was bitter, undrinkable water, and so God provided a way to make it drinkable. And then the second time, God told Moses, "Take your staff and strike a rock. And when you strike that rock, water will pour forth from the rock for everybody to drink." But this time, rather than God telling Moses to strike the rock to get water out of it, God tells Moses, "You and Aaron need to speak to the rock. So talk to the rock and then everybody will get water." So Moses took his staff, just like God had said, and he and Aaron went before the assembly. And then it says Moses was like, "Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock?" And then Moses takes his staff and he hits the rock twice. He doesn't speak to the rock, he hits it like he did last time. And so water does actually come out, even though he didn't do what God said. But God is still upset at Moses and Aaron. God says to them, "Because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them."
God is upset with Moses and Aaron because they did not believe in him to treat him as holy. Instead, their response to the people of Israel was, "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And then they hit the rock until it gave them what they wanted. Clearly, after 40 years, Moses was fed up with "you rebels," as he called them. But his response, instead of trusting God, that God would provide the water from the rock if they just talked to the rock, his response was, "I've got to get these people water. I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them that I can get water out of the rock." And so by doing that, he proved himself to the people of Israel when he was supposed to be proving God to the people of Israel. He was supposed to be showing God's holiness to Israel. But instead, since he didn't do that, he didn't trust what God told him he needed to do. And because of that, God punished him.
And that punishment that God is giving them is that Aaron and Moses won't get to go to the promised land. We had already read that the entire generation of adults who had come out of Egypt was going to die in the wilderness. They weren't going to inherit the promise of the land. And the reason why they couldn't inherit it is because of their unbelief. And so we're seeing here, God is saying to Moses and Aaron, "You didn't believe me, and so now you don't get to inherit the promise either." Their unbelief cut them off from the promise. And so when all this happened, they named the place Meribah, or in Hebrew, Meribah, which means contention or provocation, because they contended and provoked God. And this whole story speaks to something that we read later in the Psalms. We actually referenced this in a previous episode when the book of Hebrews quoted it. But the Psalm says, "Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, when your fathers tested me. They tried me, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who err in their heart, and they do not know my ways. Therefore I swore in my anger, truly they shall not enter into my rest." So the psalm is encouraging us to not be like the people of Israel and to not even be like Moses here, because they hardened their hearts. As Hebrews points out, they were in unbelief. And I think that's really important to note here, that it's not just the people of Israel who are constantly stumbling and sinning who disbelieved God. It was Moses and Aaron who disbelieved God, and Moses and Aaron who were cut off from the promises because of that unbelief. If Moses, who the 10 plagues were done through, he got the 10 commandments, he saw God's form, he spoke to him face to face, if even Moses can fall into unbelief, then any one of us, you or I, could fall into unbelief if we're not careful. We need to not be so proud and so full of ourselves that we assume that we can never stumble. No one is beyond stumbling, and any one of us can fall into unbelief and be hardened by sin. So we need to be firm in God's word and do what God says and believe what God says. Moses and Aaron rejected what God said because they thought that they could do it better. But instead, we need to be humble and submit ourselves to God. And when he tests us, we need to submit to that.
Now, at this point, like we've said, they're in the last year of their sojourning in the wilderness. And so that means that it's finally almost time to get to the promised land.
Finally, almost time.
So Moses leads the people of Israel and they start traveling toward Canaan. But in order to do that, they have to pass through the land of Edom. Now, as we said before, way back in Genesis, Edom is the nation that comes from Jacob's brother, Esau. So Edom and Israel are kind of like brother nations. And so Moses sends messengers to the people of Edom saying, hey, it's your brothers, Israel. We just got out of Egypt. We're on our way to get to the promised land. Please let us pass through your land.
And Edom says, no.
Moses sends more messengers that say, please let us go through your land. We'll take the fastest route possible. We won't stop along the way. We won't take any of your food or any of your water. If we do, we'll pay for it. Just please let us go through. And Edom says no. And it says Edom actually sends out their army to come up against Israel and block them from coming in. They don't actually attack Israel, but they are making sure Israel does not go in under threat of attack. So rather than fight Edom, Israel agrees to not pass through Edom's territory. Instead, they now have to go around Edom, which is a much longer journey to get to the land of Canaan.
And the portion says that along the way, as they're at the border of Edom and they're making their way around to go to the promised land, God says to Moses, all right, it's time that Aaron is going to die. Moses, you're in charge of taking all the priestly garments from Aaron and giving them to his son Eleazar. He's going to succeed Aaron as the new high priest. And so you're going to transfer that priesthood down to Eleazar. And then Aaron is going to be gathered to his people. He's going to die and you're going to bury him. And so on Mount Hor, which is right at the border of Edom, Aaron, Moses, and Eleazar go up. And then only Moses and Eleazar come down. Aaron dies on the mountain, and the people of Israel mourn him for 30 days.
Aaron has been leading the people of Israel in his capacity as high priest for 40 years. Through that time, we've seen him do his work of atoning for the people of Israel for all their sins and giving God's blessing to the people and coming in the presence of God, interceding to God on behalf of the people of Israel, and so delivering them from death sometimes. But now we see that the high priest who throughout his life delivered the people from death, now himself is being overcome by death. And so in a way, this puts an end to Aaron's work. It puts an end to his capacity to keep interceding for Israel. Israel has lost their high priest. Now Aaron's responsibilities have been transferred to Eleazar, and so he will start over in doing the work of a high priest. But he'll die too one day. Every single priest will have the same problem. They will try to deliver from death, but in the end, they will die. Every high priest, that is, except Yeshua. The author of Hebrews goes on to explain this is exactly why we needed a better priest than the ones that came from the order of Aaron. And the entire priesthood of Levi has this problem. And so he says, if indeed then perfection were through the priesthood of Levi, what further need had they for another Kohen to arise, one according to the order of Melchizedek, and not to be called according to the order of Aharon? And it is yet more abundantly most evident if there arises another Kohen according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who came not according to the Torah of a command regarding the flesh, but according to the power of an endless life. For it is testified of him, you are a Kohen forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And those who have become Kohanim are indeed many, because they are hindered by death from remaining in office. But this one, because of his remaining forever, has the priesthood non-transient. Therefore, he is also able to save to the very end those coming through him to God, because he is ever living to make intercession for them. Aaron's priesthood had a flaw in that all of its priests would die. But Yeshua, in coming according to the order of eternal priests, the order of Melchizedek, he had the power of endless life. And so he is able to give that life to us through his interceding for us forever. So long as Aaron was a priest, he did the work of a priest. But he couldn't keep that work going forever because he died. But because Yeshua lives forever, Yeshua's priesthood functions forever. It does not transfer to anyone else. It does not fail. It is not interrupted. He is always there interceding for everyone who comes to him. And through him, we can come to God forever.
So the portion goes on to give another instance of the people of Israel complaining against God. And here we actually see the story of the bronze serpent that Moses sets up. Basically, the people of Israel are complaining, why'd you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? There's no food or water. We loathe this miserable manna. We just hate it. And so God, again, he starts killing off the people. This time he sends venomous serpents to bite the people and kill them. So as the people are dying from their snake bites, they're saying to Moses, we've sinned, we're sorry, please intercede to God for us so that these snakes will stop killing us. And so rather than God turning away the snakes and making them all leave, instead he tells Moses to create a bronze serpent, set it up on a standard or a pole above the people of Israel such that they can all look to that bronze serpent. And anyone who looks to the bronze serpent will be healed and they'll live even if they've been bitten by a snake. So it doesn't say why God told Moses to save the people in this way, but it serves as a visual picture of God's salvation. They're looking to that visible, tangible rallying point and representation of God's salvation, deliverance, and life. And as we see, this is also a foreshadowing of the Master Yeshua. In John 3, Yeshua says, as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the desert, so it is necessary for the Son of Man to be lifted up, so that everyone who's believing in him may have life everlasting. And then there's the famous verse, for God so loved the world that the Son, the one and only, he gave, so that everyone who's believing in him may not be destroyed, but may have life everlasting. So Yeshua is explicitly likening himself to the bronze serpent, which was lifted up for the entire people of Israel to see. As we see later in John, the phrase lifted up is a euphemism for being crucified. And so Yeshua is saying that the bronze serpent was pointing to Yeshua's crucifixion and that anyone who looks expectingly to Yeshua can receive salvation and life. Now, one other thing about the bronze serpent that a lot of people might not know is that it's actually referenced later in the Tanakh. It says that in the reign of Hezekiah, he removed all the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah. So these are all different idols that were in Israel. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the sons of Israel burned incense to it and called it Nehushtan. So we read here, the people of Israel basically turned the bronze serpent into an idol. They were worshiping the bronze serpent instead of worshiping God. And so Hezekiah ended up having to destroy this thing which God had told Moses to create. So I think that this can be a good warning for all of us, which is that even good things can be twisted to become evil. If we're putting our trust in the wrong things, then it doesn't matter if that thing is a good thing, you're using it evilly. God didn't set up the bronze serpent so that people would say, oh, we should trust in the bronze serpent. He put up the bronze serpent so that they would say, we should trust in Adonai. Adonai can save us. It was a visual representation of what God can do. In a similar way, we read later in the prophets that the people of Israel trusted in the temple rather than trusting in God. We can trust in physical things and that won't get us anywhere. We can trust in crosses and church buildings. We can trust in Torah scrolls and synagogues. None of that can save us. Only God can save us. And so we shouldn't ever confuse physical things for the God who gives us true salvation.
So after a lot of traveling, the people of Israel finally get around the land of Edom. But before they can get to Canaan, they now have another obstacle because the land they're headed for is actually the land of Sihon, king of the Amorites. Now, the Amorites are actually a subgroup of the Canaanites, but these Amorites don't actually live in the land of Canaan, so they're not in the promised land. Instead, the land they're in is land that was recently conquered from Moab. So rather than just conquering them like they're going to do when they get to Canaan, the people of Israel say to Sihon, please let us pass through your land. It's very much like what they say to the people of Edom. Please let us go through. We're going to go as fast as we can. We're not going to take any of your food or water. We're just trying to get to Canaan. But instead, Sihon's response is to gather his army and actually attack Israel.
Ooh, bad idea.
And so because Sihon attacked Israel, Israel ends up fighting back and defeating them. And they defeat the Amorites in the entire kingdom of Sihon, take all their cities, all their territory. Israel has just made its first land conquest. And so after that, they then continue on their way. And another Amorite king from right nearby them, named Og, king of Bashan, he comes out to fight against Israel. He does the exact same thing Sihon did. And so what do you know? The exact same thing happens. God says to Moses, "Do not fear him, for I have given him into your hand and all his people and all his land, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites." So they defeated him and his sons and all his people until he had no survivor left, and they possessed his land. So immediately after seeing the results of attacking Israel, this other Amorite king, Og, is like, "I'm going to go attack Israel." And so as a result of these two kings' foolish arrogance and exalting themselves against Israel, Israel gets their first land. And so, having taken this land, Israel makes camp, and they are now very near the promised land. They're right between the Jordan River and the territory of Moab. In fact, it says that they're right across the Jordan from Jericho. And so basically, they are in position to begin the conquest of Canaan. They're right there at the border, and they'll basically be staying here until it's time to begin to take the land that Adonai has promised to the people of Israel. So I think the big takeaway from this portion is that we need to look to God for instruction and for life. Moses and Aaron, after leading Israel for so long, messed up in this big way because they stopped looking to God for instruction. When God told them what he wanted them to do, they instead decided to do it their own way. And so they weren't believing in God, and they weren't treating him as holy. And they paid the price for that, namely that they died before they were able to enter into the promised land. If they had instead trusted in God and followed his instructions, then they would have lived to see God's blessing. So also we see with the bronze serpent that the people of Israel were suffering from a plague, and God sent deliverance if they trusted in him, if they looked to the source of salvation that he provided. And so if they looked to God's provision, they would have life. And of course, the bronze serpent also points to Yeshua. He is lifted up for all of us to see if we will look to him for salvation, for life. And if we look to God's word for instruction and we look to him for life, then we will find instruction and life, and we will receive his promise and his blessing.
That wraps up the portion of Chuqat. In the next portion, we'll be looking at Balak, so be sure to tune in for that. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep updated on new videos. And if you would, please consider sending us a donation to help us make more videos like these. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. God bless.